Hey everybody, Nate here from WASD20. Welcome back. Today I've got a review for you. This is the Star Wars Force and Destiny beginner game. This is a box set that serves as an introduction to the main rule system for Star Wars Force and Destiny. A little bit more of a beginner-friendly step than just breaking right into the core rulebook for the game. And it's also a pretty good introduction for someone who is totally new to tabletop role-playing games in general. So we're going to be opening this thing up, taking a look at the contents, and I will tell you what I think. Let's take a look. So here we have it. This is the Star Wars Force and Destiny beginner game. This is a box set that does not include the full rule set, but it's enough to get you started and keep you going for a little while at least. If you don't already know, this is by Fantasy Flight Games, and they have a series of Star Wars rule sets that are all based on the same core mechanics, but they each do have some of their own system-specific mechanics as well. The three systems are Age of Rebellion, which is all about the struggle between the Empire and the Rebel Alliance. Then you have Edge of the Empire, which is all about smugglers and bounty hunters out on the edge of the Empire in these kind of fringe, lawless regions. And then, lastly, this one was released most recently, Force and Destiny, and it's all about Force users. It doesn't mean that there's not some overlap between these three systems. There certainly can be, but this one is specific to the Jedi, Sith, and other Force users and Force-sensitive characters. If we look at the back of the box here, they show what's included. We will be opening it up in a moment to see a little bit more of that. Overall, I just got to say the box is not very good quality at all. This is probably the worst box set I've owned. You can see I did put some tape there. I have to baby this thing. You can't stack anything on it. It's really flimsy cardboard and just not very good. I would say the Pathfinder beginner box is like the best. It's super beefy, really sturdy. The D&D one is sturdier than this, somewhere in between this and the Pathfinder one. Those are the three starter sets I own. So this is not a true unboxing. I have owned this thing for over a year now, and so we'll take a look, but know that some of this stuff is not as I originally found it. First off, we've got these dice here. I'll explain the dice, but these are dice you will need to play. You would have a very hard time playing with a standard set of polyhedral dice, although I suppose you could kind of rig them up in order to make it work, but it is nice that this comes with the game. And I think this definitely is something that makes it pretty worth it to buy one of these beginner games. Next, we have these pawns. These actually came in big cardboard sheets, but I have since punched them out and put them in a Ziploc bag. Ziploc bags are like just a necessary thing for many, many board games and role-playing game sets I've found over the years. There aren't many games that come with good storage options for their own stuff, and this is no exception. Not a big deal. That's why we keep Ziploc bags handy. So there are some pretty big pawns here, and then there are lots of these smaller ones as well. These, it's been a while since I played this, but these are the, I think, Force indicate, dark side, light side, I believe. And yeah, so you've got just all kinds of, some of these would make good character tokens. Others of them are clearly, monsters and enemies that you might face in the game. So yeah, overall there's a really good selection. They give you a lot more than is needed for the actual starter adventure that they include. They give you a wide variety here that can take you far beyond what you need just for the adventure that they include. So that's really nice. It definitely gives you some flexibility to keep on running games using all the extra stuff they give you. All right, and then there's this space filler here. Pretty standard, I found, in a lot of these box sets. Certainly the D&D 5th edition box set has a big spacer in there. And then you've got these books here. It also comes with this thing right here, and I think this probably came on top. Read this first. And so this is just some of the basics. What is a role-playing game? Who are the players? Here's an example of play. Really nice art throughout. This picture of these young Force users swinging lightsabers around and practicing under this aged master with a cane. Then you've got this example of play is really nice. It includes just kind of an example sort of script of how that might go between a GM and several players. strategizing and talking about things and making checks and all that stuff. Then there is how to use the maps and character tokens here, more player GM script, and then you've got this right here, traditional Star Wars text crawl, gets you into the basic story of what's to come in the beginner adventure that they include. Then you have read this second, so they actually recommend you read this before you go and read all the rules. Possibly because the rules would just scare people away, but also because this does include kind of some staggered rule introductions as well. So you got the credits here. Welcome to the Star Wars Force and Destiny beginner game. The contents of this box, here's all that comes in the game. And you've got welcome to Spinter, this is the location, they talk about the map. And then they've got this basic story of the adventure begins. Throughout this there are definitely some rules basics, so it's nice you can kind of learn the rules while you're reading the adventure. And then of course they do have the more fully fleshed out rules in the other book. So broken into sections here, really nice, color-coded boxes, and once you kind of get used to the format here, that does become a really handy tool. I won't go too far here, but I will say that at the end, they do have this section on wrap-ups and rewards, and other encounters in the valley, and then further adventures as well. What might the players do next? And that's, again, really nice that they include some of that stuff. It is a pretty short adventure. It is just, made to be played in one session, so I would say, 2 to 4 hours, depending on your group. But it is nice that they include some other tools to keep you going if you want to. All right, then we do get these character folios here. So these are just basically glorified character sheets. The nice thing about them is that they have some good explanations in the margins here. This would normally just be your character sheet, but instead you also get this stuff, which is really nice. They do have kind of the backstory of each character, which is also cool, so you can get into that and role play a little bit. But what they've got here is they've got the character sheet, and I think this is like probably level 1, and then you've got level 2, I assume, advancement. So this is when you level up. This is the one you get to use, and I think that happens at some point in the starter adventure. And then they've also got back here just a blank one so that you can customize it. You could potentially level this guy up more. Here's a career tree, which is kind of cool, and then they've got investing experience points, some tips on that, skill and training. Little handy symbols here, which are all over the place, which is really nice because it does use a custom set of dice. That's something you just got to have. Once you learn it, it's not so bad, but it is a bit of a trick to wrap your mind around the new system of dice. So we'll talk about that in a minute, but I'll just give you a quick flip through the other character sheets as well here, the character folios. This guy is a sentinel. Then we've got Sorenda, who is a guardian, wields a lightsaber. So even though they are all Force users, they're not all necessarily using lightsabers all the time. They are Force sensitive, we would say. So they all have some connection to the Force, but some of them are more Jedi-like than others. All right, Seeker. And then you've got this big map, which is really, really nice. It's not huge. It's generally, pretty small compared to the battle maps that I normally use. It's just kind of like 4 sheets of paper, essentially, the size of 4 regular sheets of paper. On the back here, you've got some other locations. This would be more for, pointing here or there. On this one right here, just as a reference. And these two would be more like zoomed in encounter locations. And so yeah, you can just put the little tokens on here, and it is handy just to show positioning of where enemies are and all that stuff. But the big map of the temple, I think is pretty nice looking. I like it a lot. Then you've got the rule book here. Read this last. So we'll take a moment here to explain a little bit of how the dice work. It uses a dice pool system, and there are various symbols on here, but essentially there are positive dice. There are dice that do good things. They're more likely to have success and triumph and advantage. These are the positive symbols. And then there are the more negative dice, which impose some difficulty. Failure, despair, and threat points are found on those. So these three right here, the D6, the D8, and the D12 of these colors are positive, and then the ones that are the ones that create more challenge or difficulty are these ones right here. So you've got your setback die, you've got your challenge die, and you've got your difficulty die. Then here you've got your boost die, ability die, and your proficiency die. So you might be rolling, for example, if you're really good at something, you might be rolling, these right here, but then there might be some circumstance that also includes one of these that makes it a big challenge. And so you roll these together, and then essentially the negative symbols will cancel out the positive and vice versa, and you want to get more positives than negatives. But the really interesting thing about it is that it uses a narrative dice system. And so what that means is that even if you succeed, there could be a threat involved, a negative side effect or consequence, even on a successful check. They're canceled out by advantage symbols, but you might have a success, more successes than failures, but then also have a threat or some despair left over. Or vice versa. You might fail, but there's some advantage that you have after the symbols all cancel each other out. You're left with some advantage. And it's up to the GM, really, to narrate what that might be. So I think one of the examples they use in the book here is that, yes, you successfully climbed this hill, but you are now exhausted or something like that. Or you have successfully repaired your ship and got it going in time to escape these TIE fighters, but your engine is now damaged more severely, and you're going to need to seek repairs before too long. And so anyway, I think that's a really cool, unique system. It's called a narrative dice system. Fantasy Flight is also going to be using a similar dice pool system, almost exactly the same, in their new setting agnostic game. It's just a rule set that is made for any setting. It's called Genesis, and it's coming out soon. I'll put a link to some information about that down in the description below too. I'm definitely interested in that. It's going to be worth checking out, I think. Now that I've explained the basics of how the dice work, which is really core to the rules of this system, we'll get into the rest of the rule book now. It does explain a little bit more about the dice here, and it also mentions this force die, which I didn't talk about, and we're just going to skip over that now for the purposes of keeping it kind of brief. Talks about building a basic dice pool here, interpreting the pool, other types of checks, and then we get the destiny points, which are using this right here. Investing experience points, how combat works. It's not going to be super different from other combat systems in some other role-playing games, but definitely, as someone who has played almost all Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition, it did take a little work to wrap my mind around. But once, I was able to run the game just fine. I ran it for my kids, and then I have also helped students run it for each other. Overall, my students' impression of the game was not super favorable. They really were just really into 5th edition and wanted to play more of that. But I will say that, overall, I've heard excellent things about this game. I know a lot of people who really like it. A lot of my friends are particularly into Edge of the Empire. That flavor of the Star Wars universe is more compelling to them. A lot of that's just going to come down to preference, and it's important to note that they do have box sets like this for all of them, for Age of Rebellion, for Edge of the Empire, and of course here for Force and Destiny. So if one of those flavors is more compelling to you, then I would certainly recommend checking out that individual box set if you don't feel like playing a Force user. Anyway, you do have skills and talents in this, and when you look at the character sheet, you can understand that a little better. And there's, of course, the Force, and this is there's Force powers that you do get. And there's also the danger of kind of turning to the dark side. A little bit similar to the mechanic of the Shadow in Adventures in Middle-earth, which I did a review of. I'll put a link to that right up there. That was an interesting system that I really liked. And then you've got Adversaries here. So just not a ton of adversaries that they give you here. But, there's a dozen or so, maybe a little less. Enough to get you going for sure. So in the end, do I think it's a good value? Do I think it's worth buying? Yeah, I do. I think it's a good way to, especially if you're interested in getting into the Fantasy Flight Star Wars games, it's a really great way to dip your toes in and get a feel for what the game is. I think that the fact that it comes with some of these tokens and dice really adds to a great value, because that's something you're going to be able to use even after you're done with the beginner game itself and move on to the core rules. I believe the price of these is about $30 or $25 at most places online. I'm not sure about game shops. I imagine it'd be a little more. While the tokens are really nice, I do want to note that you don't need these to play. You can totally play Theater of the Mind without maps and minis, and a lot of people I've seen playing online just play that way. So overall, while this is not a perfect product, the box is pretty flimsy, like I said. The starter adventure is just 1 2 to 4 hour session, although it is pretty good. I do think it's a really good adventure overall and a great way to introduce people to the game. And it's not too uncommon to have an adventure that short. Overall, I do think that the product is excellent here. I think the rule book, the character folios, and all the other materials do a really good job of explaining things for people who are totally new to the system. And they're just a great teaching tool. So overall, the Star Wars Force and Destiny beginner game is WASD 20 approved. It gets my stamp of approval. I recommend it. You can check out an Amazon affiliate link down in the description below, and buying through those links does give the channel a little boost, so I appreciate that. Let me know if you have any comments or questions down below. I would love to hear from you. If you own any of the Fantasy Flight Games Star Wars products, I'd love to hear what you think as well. But yeah, I'm excited for Genesis, definitely excited to check that out, and I am definitely toying with getting one of the rule books. I'm not sure which one I would get, Age of Rebellion, Edge of the Empire, or Force and Destiny, but I would like to get one of the core rule books, and I would like to play more of this game for sure. Alright, well, thanks everybody for joining me. Take care. You'll see me again very soon.